of our mothers, souls of our fathers, souls of our ancestors, smile down on us, smile down on us, and bless us. Hey, souls of our mothers, souls of our fathers, souls of our grandfathers, souls of our grandmothers, smile down on us, smile down on us, and bless us, and bless us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenny Hall, and I'm the Assistant Director of Education in the Department of Education and Public Engagement here at the New Museum. I join you today from the unceded land of the Lenape people, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to Lenape people and elders and ancestors past, present, and future. On behalf of the New Museum, I'm glad to welcome you to tonight's conversation with artist King Cobra, also known as Doreen Lynette Garner, and curator Vivian Crockett, joined by Reiki master Hue Hallums. Programs like this are core to the New Museum's work of advancing new art and new ideas. I would like to particularly thank Vivian Crockett and Education and Public Engagement staff members Austin DeBose, Derek Wright, Joshua from Steno Captions, Jasmine Asso, and the team at JTT, Hue Hallums, as well as the entire New Museum team for their help bringing this program together. New Museum public programs are generously supported by the Charlotte and Bill Ford Artist Talks Fund. We gratefully acknowledge the Bowery Council of the New Museum for support of education and public engagement programs. We also thank our members and supporters like you who help to make these programs possible. Without further ado, I'll pass this on to Vivian.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much, Hugh, for grounding us in this space. It's much needed. um, there's so much to talk through about what today has been like and the experience of doing this project together. So Cobra, I just wanted to do a little vibe check and get a sense of how you're feeling, some of the feelings you're processing as we wind down from that activation and share the space here.
Yeah, thank you. The activation was really intense. I feel like I've been kind of charging up since this morning. So it's really different being able to see the work actually be activated by other people. It felt really powerful. I feel like I'm still charged from the actions that took place an hour ago. And, please forgive me, I'm up here still kind of shaking a little bit, but yeah, just harnessing all that and trying to figure out what to do with it.
I mean, I'll just say that's one of the things that I've always appreciated in knowing you and witnessing your practice and the evolution of your work is it's embodied, and it comes from deep within and it shows. I think it's felt. It's felt when people are in that space that we've created together upstairs with your work. And I think it's felt in this space, and I'm sure it was felt by the folks who engaged with the work today. And we'll make some space to talk through things that came up for people if they feel comfortable sharing. I wanted to begin talking a little bit about your engagement with J. Marion Sims because it's been part of your practice for a long time, and just wanting to give folks context for how you began doing that work and how we got to this point now in this activation.
Sure. Yeah. When I was in grad school, I was really interested in ways that the body can fail, and so naturally I started to do research, into the medical industry. I've always been really interested in tumors and growths and things. As I started to do that research, I found out about Henrietta Lacks. And then as I started reading up on Henrietta Lacks, I realized that there were so many other instances where Black people and Black bodies were exploited by the medical industry. One of the initial stories that came up was about J. Marion Sims and the ways that he tortured Black women. When I first moved to New York, I didn't know that his statue was up in Central Park. So it was a chance for me to kind of extend my research. I went up to where the statue is located and also the medical library that's across the street. And I actually read through a couple of his journals before going to the statue. His journals are very violent and perverted. Just the ways that he talks about women in general, not even specifically Black women. The way that he talks about Black women is particularly dehumanizing. So after reading through some of those passages and hearing some of his direct words, I felt more rage. And then as I, went across the street to look at the statue, I just became frustrated. And the pedestal that he was standing on was just so tall, you can't even access anything besides his feet, right? And that's really purposeful to make you feel like you can never really access, or you can't ever really hurt them, right? So I became frustrated with that and became inspired to create the work for White Men on a Pedestal, which was to recreate his sculpture, recreate the statue, but mostly so that I could take a skin cast of his body, right? I just wanted to do the same surgeries that he was performing on these women in front of an audience. And so yeah, made the skin, did the surgery, and in that way, like I felt a lot of satisfaction being able to cut through what is representative as his flesh. And yeah, I feel like as the years have gone by, I just haven't forgotten about him. I haven't forgotten about him, and yeah, I just in all ways, I want to continue the assault on his body. His body is actually buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Yeah, if anyone wants the pin, I can give you the pin. Yeah, so for a while, I was actually like visiting his grave. I was collecting urine in a 40 bottle, and I would like go to his grave on the same day that he died and pour one out for him on his grave. And his family, you know, wife and kids, they can get it too. But yeah, so I just never want him to feel like, you know, we've forgotten. And it's not like he's also the only physician that's ever done any things like this. But, you know, just continuing the research, I just, in a lot of ways, felt like it's not a situation where you can just make one piece and then it's done. I just want to keep reminding people to stay vigilant, you know.
Could we get the slides up of Purge just so people can see a couple of the images of that? And we'll get back to this image in a second. So here's the sadist himself prior to today's activation. We'll get back to this. If we can move on to some of those other images. Yeah, so this is you during this. I was supposed to be part of this performance.
You were.
I regret that I was not. But witnessing it was amazing. For those who were not present, there's a partial documentation of it online that you can watch. But, you know, you really set this up as this kind of operating theater, but really emphasizing the perverse quality of his actions. And I mean, I think it was such a powerful enactment of revenge, like, but retribution more than anything else. There's another image as well. This is a little bit of a close-up of that performance. Are there any reflections you want to share about that particular performance activation?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the other surgeons that were included in this performance were people that contributed their bodies to the other works in the show. So I did a lot of body casting of Black femmes to create some of the other sculptures in the show. You were also one of the people that I did a body cast of. So it's you know, it's nice to do this full circle. But yeah, so it was really important for me to employ them in this situation because it's not often that we see 7 Black femmes like ripping a white body apart, right? As a spectacle. So that was really important to be specific about who's doing what. And I've also been inspired by like the Thomas Eakins painting, The Gross Clinic. So surgical theater is a thing. Another situation, Joyce Heth was a woman that P.T. Barnum exploited in his circus, and after she passed away, he did a public autopsy of her body. So doing public slicing is not something that is new to white people. So I wanted to kind of reclaim this action and present it just as mantras, but you know, just be really specific about who's doing what.
So his body lay dormant in your studio for about 5 years, and then we resurrected him for this. So what you see upstairs and what you see in that other image, if we can go back to the image of the sculpture. I promise I won't play too much like popcorning of the slides, but Could you speak a little bit about the decision to kind of, I mean, you talked about it as a kind of reanimation of that flesh because it felt like it needed some of that power back in it so that we could go back and fuck them up again. It had been a little while.
Yeah,
And
it has
how
been a
we
while.
got here. Yeah.
Yeah, the piece actually went to another show briefly. And when it came back, like after we took the top off the casket, his head was like, his neck was sliced open somehow. I mean, you know, it's all good, but his neck was sliced open and just kind of like hanging over. So I'm like, okay, well, I think I should reapproach this, and maybe this is a sign. And I feel like that's often too like how I end up making moves in my studio. It's like something weird will happen that's a little bit too coincidental, right? And then it reminds us that we need to reapproach. So in thinking about ways to like perpetuate the assault, I felt like a punching bag was appropriate. Just because like the body section is so large, you know, he's wearing like a big overcoat and like some slacks. The head is pretty small in comparison. But yeah, I just felt like the punching bag was appropriate, especially like some of the things that I was experiencing, like going to different museums and stuff, and like thinking about raffia, and also about like conjuring spirits and like, you know, assaults on people that have already passed. So yeah, it just felt really appropriate. And it also felt more open to the public to be able to engage rather than just myself in a select few cutting into the flesh where, you know, people can hit as much as they want to and it's not necessarily causing damage, but it is causing effect.
Yeah, that thing shook. That thing shook a lot. And I did want to go back to that first image that was originally up just before this one, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of container of the space, and how, you know, the dialogue that we had about even, you know, the treatment of the glass and the decision to light the show in a particular way and what some of the goals were around that.
Yeah, I was really inspired by the Francis Bacon triptych painting. So the composition of that really drove, I guess, the overall visual aesthetics of the show. It's such a strange space, right? It's kind of like skinny and long. So it was difficult trying to figure out how to navigate that. I've been trying to be more honest with myself about what I'm interested in aesthetically. And it has come towards the colors like red blood, white flesh, and then like maybe just a white, a Caucasian tone, but then also just blank white. So those were the things that I was thinking about in terms of like the composition of the show, and yeah, also just like incorporating disease overall, just thinking about like the transatlantic slave trade and the fact that, you know, so many of the diseases brought over from Europe actually wiped out so many Black and Indigenous people. So that was something that I wanted to lead with. Thinking about like, you know, the smallpox, the syphilis, the scarlet fever, the bubonic plague, among many other diseases. It was just something that I really wanted to focus on, but also like use a type of visual language that people are used to, right? Some of these like historical references that people are used to like appreciating, to be able to have an extended conversation about like what else was going on when those things were being created.
I mean, I think I was struck by the fact that I think when we were talking about what the space would feel like, you know, we're talking about, I mean, it's even in the wall text, like, oh, the revolted, like the feeling, the like unbridled anger, and there's so much to be angry about. And I think for some people, red evokes that, right? Like they see red, there's that expression, you think of that. And I really thought the space was going to feel more intense and hard in that way, but I think there's also a softness in the space. And, you know, I think depending on even the time when you're navigating that space. I know people who had repeat visits and said, you know, this one time I felt this particular way, this other time I was in a different state of mind and it hit me completely differently. And then going back again, there are those who like feel, I think especially with the beautiful piece by Sean J. Wright, The Amazing Grace, and the effect that that has. Everlasting Grace is the name of that piece. Overall, I think it just creates a really powerful protective space, which I think you and I working on this project have had to continuously reassert as we're navigating an institutional space, especially one that is meant to be open to all, right? But there's a way in which a lot of institutional spaces center whiteness without naming that. And that's something that we just have normalized and have, you know, are accustomed to having to tolerate. And when you shift the center of focus, I think there's a lot of pushback around doing so, and that's viewed as exclusionary, right? Whereas these other frameworks are not seen that way. So I think this is a gallery that I think people are used to seeing straight through, and you know, you can see it from the street. And I think there was this really beautiful play between how much you could see, who then felt compelled to enter that space, who felt maybe more reluctance to enter that space. And I think that navigation has been a big part of that process, definitely for me, and I would say for you. I'll go ahead and say it. But even picking the red, I mean, we kept playing with the different reds, and it's like a little less carry, like a little more this, like.
Yeah, it's like, do we want ketchup red, period red?
Yeah. There's lots of different kinds.
Red,
Yeah, there's lots of different
many
kinds.
types of reds.
Yeah, but we got here. I mean, you did begin to talk a little bit about these references in the work. But I know there's a little bit of a backstory about kind of also this meditation on life aboard the slave ship, which I think has also been, I think your work has dealt with, of course, medical history and pathology quite a bit, but I think this was a space where you were thinking about the middle passage literally, and creating a space to really reflect on that, which I think doesn't happen as often. There isn't really a question there, except it's an opening, because I know a little bit of the backstory of this.
Yeah, so I a lot of times I'm inspired by memes that I see. So I actually saw a meme, and I can't even, when was this? Maybe it was like December or something. I saw a meme that it was a tweet. And it said, did you know that Europeans were throwing so many Black people overboard during the transatlantic slave trade that it permanently changes the migration pattern of sharks? So oftentimes there will be a trail of sharks behind the boats, just because they knew it was a consistent source of food. They were using it as using sharks as weapons of terror. Whether they were also like tossing dead bodies overboard, or dunking people in that were still alive to avoid insurrection from the rest of the people on the boat. Sorry, I'm going to be discussing some really intense things. So there's that. I started doing some research and found the book The Slave Ship by Marcus Rediker. And it talks extensively about the Middle Passage, how the boats were made, diseases, etc. So I actually had to listen to the audio version of the book, because reading through, I don't know, when you read it, it sits differently. So I was able to get through a lot more of it by using the audiobook. But yeah, it just went into a lot of detail that you have to really prepare yourself for. It's a lot of heavy material. Just thinking about like all the ways that Black people were dehumanized is pretty brutal. So along with all of the really sad accounts, there were also a lot of moments where they talked about revolts. And I felt a lot of pride when I was, reading through some of those sections. And it definitely like goes against this idea that like people had experienced apathy towards being enslaved. That's insane, right?
Dare we reference
Kanye, bitch ass movie. Yeah, no. So
not to give him any more of a platform. But
yeah, right. But it's also like, why would you think that because you have no courage that all these other people don't? So I'm just saying, like, just because you're one of those doesn't mean that everybody else was trying to sit around and experience this, right? People will rather die than be enslaved. So
could we actually put up that work? Sorry to interrupt you, but if we can move past the where we had last been before I made us move. Yeah, just to give people a visual.
Yeah, so I was just reading about a lot of the revolts and just became really inspired about like, ways that I could transform that visually to like an object or objects that people experience in real life and also feel the energy in that too. So yeah, there were many, many, many revolts. In any situation where Black people were able to revolt, they would. And they did successfully sometimes and unsuccessfully other times. Like, a lot of times they would, if they were like risking being put back into change, they opted for suicide. Suicide was the leading way to revolt, like whether it was hunger strikes, or anything really. Like sometimes even like women were like sleeping with captains in order to get like weapons and things in order to revolt. So it was like in every situation they were revolting. So I really wanted to aim to like dispel that myth or like whatever propaganda that people with no courage are trying to spread about like the hearts of people that were fighting for their lives and for the lives of like generations to come after.
Yeah, I think it's worth stating the title of this piece out loud. I'd rather the preserve me floating on the surface of the sea than be dragged into hell by those pale and free. And just your titles are fierce.
That one was a download. Straight up, I woke up in the morning and it just came out. I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh, that's the title. We're done. And sometimes, like it's really hard to come up with a title, and I try to like really sit it out and wait for it because I know it's gonna come. But yeah, it's also about like really being in tune with yourself and spirit and figuring out like, the difference between ego and like, spirit. But yeah, also being just open to like in listening.
And then if we could see the image of this work, which is part of one of the references in that piece, which is this Turner painting called The Slave Ship from 1840 that's based on a massacre called the Zong Massacre, which happened in 1781 aboard a ship where over 130 people were thrown overboard who had become sick as a result of contamination, which was quite common aboard slave ships. And alongside those folks, other people also jumped off the ship during that process. So I know that that was one of the things you were looking at, and I think just your translation of this image and that's not even the right word. your transformation really of this work. And you see here, you know, there's so much detail that I think when you first look at this work, you might not notice, but, you know, this leg haunts me in the foreground, this leg that you see popping out, and, you know, this idea of people being eaten alive is just unreal. And I think there's a detail shot of your work after this. Spence, which has some of your shark teeth there.
Yeah, the shark teeth.
Oh, there's so much to talk about. I need a nap. I don't know how you're feeling, but it's yeah. I mean, it takes an emotional toll to really spend time with this and with the level of intention that you bring to the work that you do. But yeah, I feel like as I've seen the progression of your work, I think you've really leaned into the gore of it all. And it's been amazing to witness also just the materiality of your work. And for those who don't know, Cobra is an amazing tattoo artist as well, and has really begun, I think, incorporating your tattoo practice into your work in this other art form in a way that's been, I think, really incredible to see. And there, I think the next image is of the Feast of the Hogs, perhaps. It's like when you make a PowerPoint, then the next year you're like, what's next? I think it's what we want to talk about. Yeah, but this was semi-inspired on Francis Bacon work. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about this piece, whatever you feel compelled to share, and then maybe, yeah, well, there's some detail shots also after this that we can look at.
Well, the composition of the show in general, yeah, inspired by the Francis Bacon painting, but I've been chasing after like pig carcasses for a while, just as far as like what to depict through sculpture. I have to admit that working with white flesh has made it a little bit easier for me to go into the gore. I am a huge hater, right? So I'm always like tearing other people's work apart. And when someone tears my work apart, I'm like, oh, okay, I need to change some things, right? I take it all into consideration. And at one point, Faith had made some post, and it was about like whether or not you can continue to create work and be successful as a Black artist without like representing Black people in the work visually. There were also like comments about this is just artists in general. And then there was comments about like creating Black trauma for white spaces. And I thought about it for a long time, and it was really important to me, especially even thinking about like the selling of work, right? And thinking about things going up for auction, like, you know, God forbid if that ever happens, if I'm making sculptures that have Black bodies in it, I don't want Black bodies up on the auction, right?
The literal auction block?
Yeah. So it definitely caused me to pivot because, yeah, I was accepting of that critique. I wanted to change that. Mostly also because I'm a huge hater. I don't want any leaks in my work. I don't want anybody to be able to say anything, right? I want to cover all the bases. So working with white flesh has allowed me to be a little bit more violent, which is what I'm trying to do anyway, right? And in doing that, I have been working with a different color palette and like trying to figure out how to like make this flesh look more alive, which usually means like layering in like reds and blues and felting powder, like just things that makes it look like it has a pulse. So with that, I've just always been like less likely to add the color surfacely on the exterior. And I wanted to figure out ways to make the color or the life come from within, right? So instead of painting silicone on the outside, I just started thinking about like, oh, I could just tattoo it, right? I can implant ink into this silicone body. So working with the white flesh has allowed me to start experimenting with that, which has been really cool, just as far as like, you know, getting like colors of pus and then also like scab tones like really close together without like having to breathe in like noxious gases while I'm working with the silicone, right? But yeah, there's a lot of details in this piece that many people probably don't know. Like, for example, the rib cage is composed of blonde hair weave covered in silicone that's pinned in. There's also like some cabochons of like, you know, white women, which is funny.
White women cameos
White
is
women
what it says on the
cameos.
materials.
But yeah, just like a lot of different materials. Also, it's not that I want to like exclude Black people from my process at all, but definitely wanted to hit the emphasis on like the revolt, right? So in this piece, there's like a little hand that is.
We can go to the next slide. You can see that
Okay.
detail a little better.
Yeah, there's a hand peeking out that's grabbing onto the knife that was used to cut this pig open. So it's just like little things that I like to leave for people that are really into like investigating work and sculpture. But it also drives the point home that like, you know, in any situation, grab that real quick. We can use that later.
I mean, I had a lot of conversations about this knife. Let me tell you, I think there's a way in which, of course, you know, again, as a public institution, there's a lot of liability, a lot of concerns, a lot of things that we're navigating in this space. But I think there was something also very like symbolically threatening about this Black hand peeking out with this knife saying, "I'm ready," you know, and I think a lot of anxieties come out in the space as we're doing the work. And I'll say that as a curator who also tends to work with people who I consider to be my people, who I want to, you know, be in alliance with and centering in the work that I do, I feel like I also deal a lot with that kind of mediator role and that bridge between what we're allowed to do institutionally and where I want institutions to go, and the space that I know a lot of artists, including you, like if we could have done more. Like we did what we could. Yeah. We had to hold back, and that is incredibly frustrating for me. I imagine incredibly frustrating for you, and having to like do that back and forth. I just like want to name that's like, it's part of the work that is invisible. It's like the invisible labor of you having to enter an institution that isn't fully a safe space for you or for me, and us like trying to navigate all of that together. I mean, it's like, it's in the work, right? But it's also like, is not necessarily reflected in the final product. Like a lot of folks, like if you know, you know, and you can probably kind of sense what it takes to make this project happen. But I want to emphasize, like, yeah, how much emotional labor you have had to do to make this possible, and how much emotional labor I've had to do to make this possible, and even the emotional labor of holding the space today. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially considering the subject matters, right? Well, we're talking about like hundreds of years of enslavement and torture that we all are aware of, right? But then, you know, you can't do too much. It's like a lot of restraint on like, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't acknowledge it too much, right? But it's in comparison to like this extreme violence, which is really frustrating. Especially also like the idea of like exclusivity, right? Like, oh, well, this is supposed to be a space that's open to everyone. And it's like, okay, and we're coming up off of like segregation, right? Which, who enforced, right? So it's just a lot of hypocrisy, and it's really frustrating to have to go back and forth. But at the same time, like, I don't want to give too much energy to that because I know what the goal is and I know the work that I have to do. I know what I've been asked to do. And a lot of it is little distractions, right? You can't give it too much power because that's what the distraction is supposed to do. So you just like keep it moving. And just know that it's going to be even worse next time because I'm going to keep doing it. It's going to be bad.
It's gonna go up another level. Like this is it's a little warm up.
This is the pilot. It's the pilot.
yeah. There's lots more to come, but yeah. Ooh, I'll leave it there on that. I wanted to talk about the final piece in this space, which this photo does not do justice to. So I hope folks also go back upstairs and spend time with the work. But yeah, I just want to make a little space for us to talk about this. And I think here your rendering of flesh really comes through, and especially like one of my favorite details is the bubonic plague skin rot and how you were able to make that look so real, and you've mentioned elsewhere, even in thinking about historical references in paintings of the past, like how little care was given to the way Black skin is rendered, and how much time and attention you've taken in rendering white flesh and making it look realistic to a degree. And yeah, if only, right? If only that care existed back.
Yeah, if only. Yeah, it was really frustrating at first because there is significantly greater amount of consideration that I take in comparison to other people. Like even I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Wax Museum that's at the Alamo Draft House in downtown Brooklyn. Yeah, there's a lot of like really fucked up depictions of Black people that has always bothered me. And so while I was creating these slabs of skin, it was really frustrating. But I also leaned into making it look really disgusting instead, and like really leaning in with that because that's the history, right? It's like, oh, the disease that's what actually happened. It's not like, I'm making it look way worse than it actually was. I don't know if anybody's watching what was House of Dragons or what. The king his back is looking really crazy right now and disgusting. But but yeah, like I wanted to make sure that I was leading with the disease, and that those associations are there when we're talking about this type of history. So yeah, it was a lot of layering, doing like the way that I would create is I would pour. I use this clay that's infused with wax, so you can heat it up and like it becomes liquid, and you can pour it onto things. So I have these slabs of leather. I would pour the liquid clay onto the leather, do the impressions of the smallpox and the syphilis marks. Do that layer would be like a Caucasian, like a white skin tone. And then like slowly sift in like red felting powder into each sore, press it down, put in some blue, put in some burgundy, maybe a little bit of yellow, and then do a whole other layer of like pink over top of that. So there's literally layers to this shit, but I was really thinking about like encaustic painting, right?
Yeah.
Where you're kind of like working in the reverse or like mixing things in and then melting it back in so it's all kind of like covered in the skin or like in this membrane. So yeah, a lot of my painting education has been employed in the way that I'm working with silicone now, which is really exciting.
And I wanted to just look at one final image because we haven't actually talked about this particular revolt of, if you can go back. Although this is a good one too.
Oh, yeah.
But if you can go back where where we were with this detail here. I feel like this revolt in particular was part of the inspiration for the show and something that we really talked a lot about. And even your decision around like casting, and in this particular project, you know, you're not casting other body parts, you focused on hands, but could you talk a little bit about the decision to, bring folks in and how you choose who is a model for your work?
Yeah, Instagram.
The DMs.
Yeah, the DMs. I'm always putting out calls for models for work, whether it's like, oh yeah, I need some white boys to get tortured on stage, or if I need to do like a casting of a really tiny hand that looks like a child's hand, right? Because I don't feel comfortable doing body casts on kids if they panic. Like I just don't want them to. I don't want to put them in a position where they feel like they can't get out, right? So yeah, asking someone for like, does anyone have tiny hands that can like contribute their body to this piece? Or like, oh, I need like a muscly guy. So yeah, I'm usually just like directly hitting up my community online, which has been really cool because I get to meet people that I don't know in real life. But also they feel like they're a part of the work too. And I like the idea of, you know, these works being really important in art history and that like people are, you know, contributing to it and like they're a part of art history as well.
I feel like we made some history today with this activation. It was insane. Yeah, I'm cheesy. But it's true. I feel like, it was really incredible. And I do want to make sure we like make space to talk a little bit about that experience. And I wondered if we could bring the ocean back in here on the screen. And I know that's a fast swerve, but just want to take our time with it. But did you have any additional thoughts, like thinking about the show and talking about it and like what it feels to have this be the kind of culmination of this iteration of the project?
Yeah. Throughout the past few months, I've been like, you know, as I've been tattooing, a lot of my clients have also gone to see the show too. And, you know, we've talked about like their reactions to some of the pieces or just being in the space in general. Some people have described it as feeling like they were in church, like it felt like a different type of space. Using the red for the windows and also like the overhead lights, I feel like it softened it a lot to where it could either feel like you're in the womb, or you could feel like, you know, you're experiencing the warmth of standing under stained glass, right? So I really appreciated ways that I was still able to incorporate like some like religious iconography, in comparison to like, you know, African traditional religion, which I feel like that kind of really got activated in the last piece, Here Hangs the Skin of a Surgical Sadist. So I liked that there was kind of like this collide, because isn't that like the biggest conflict, right? This idea that like this white version of Christianity means like, oh yeah, you have to like do what you're told, or like not revolt, or like not do anything against what we say, and like behave and like do all these things, or else you'll be punished. And it takes away a lot of the strength that, you know, a lot of these people that were being abducted, they have their own religious practices, right? And they're totally different. Not totally different, but there are a lot of aspects that are similar, but also aspects that are really different. And so I appreciate that both were able to be included in the space, to give people, you know, just a little bit of room to figure it out. It is a little bit more fluid. But I also want to point out the importance of doing this show in this building initially when we did the walkthrough, looking at the space, Marie at JTT actually showed me a link that you guys have on the museum website, and it talks specifically about this being kind of like the site of the second official site of the African burial ground. So the fact that we're doing this show in this space, on top of people that have, experienced this type of violence is really important. Especially when we're talking about like spirits and like feeling empowered. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I also really love being given the opportunity to use my work to empower people or wake something up in people that has been dormant for a long time. That's what I was asked to do, and that's what I felt like I did.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, it felt very cathartic to be in that space, even when I wasn't the one punching them out myself. Like I could feel. Yeah, I wondered if anyone who was part of the activation today had any thoughts they wanted to share. I think we have a mic that can go around, and we have a little time to talk.
Hi.
Hey.
Firstly, I would just like to thank you for creating this activation. And perhaps the most important thing that y'all could have done during it was to ask all the white people to leave. I stepped into the space, and after watching folks before me go ham, I looked around and I thought, I don't want to be a spectacle. I absolutely do not want to do this for a room of white people. So I stepped out and I came back, and shortly after that request was made, and instantly I wanted to go. But then the questions of, why do I want to do this? Is it going to offer me anything? Kept on coming up. And I realized that I was just overthinking it, and that I probably just had to do it. And I didn't realize how angry I would be in the process. I'm a sex educator, so I spend a lot of time talking to youth about agency, bodily autonomy, and sometimes we do talk about the historical context of reproductive rights and justice. And so interacting with it kind of felt like acknowledging that, while like bringing up the question of who does your body belong to, and whilst we're constantly in the process of trying to answer this question, I feel like I'm getting the ability to reimagine that question for myself even. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when you stepped in the scene, whoa, activation is an understatement, honestly. Yeah, you really fucked it up. I was really impressed. I was like, oh my God. But thank you so much for being a part of it. I really appreciate it. Like I was saying, like I have all these goals for the work, and it's like an open-ended question, right? Like, are people gonna come? Are people gonna like feel the same things that I'm feeling? And I really I felt so moved by watching some of you activate the piece, like so much tension in my body, because it was really, really heavy. So I really appreciate the ways that y'all activated the space. The voyeurism was really apparent, and it bothered me too. And that's why initially I was like, can y'all give us a few minutes, like get out of the space for a little bit? And of course, like, they come back in, but I think it's also like when you're a white person, you need to be really cognizant of the fact that like y'all are always looking, right? And observing and absorbing, and sometimes that type of surveillance, it stops people from doing things and from being themselves. And so sometimes, yeah, like you do need to leave the room for a little bit. You can come back in, but it's also really important to like respect that people are going to be like being physical with this thing, and they're not necessarily comfortable with doing that in front of an audience, especially that they don't know.
I also want to thank y'all for this space. I was looking forward to doing that. I had been wanting. I think I told somebody I wanted to do a rage room, and I was like, this is better because this is exactly what I need." And I appreciated not only inflicting pain on that white man, but watching other people inflict pain on the white man. But I also want to say, like, white women are just as dangerous and violent as the
Period.
men. Yeah, so it's not like it's just whiteness. They also own plantations and did all of this stuff that they're, the guys did. So, especially white queers too. So they're not. But this is not about that. But I enjoyed doing that. It's not an enjoyment. It's like a release, is what I felt. I felt like I was releasing something and taking my power back, and also taking the mask off of whiteness, because in my personal life I have felt like, they're doing all this stuff to me, and it's like, why can't I just live? I just want to do my job and do my thing, and y'all keep on getting in my way and like saying that race is an issue, but you always bringing the shit up. Like, so at the end of the first time, because I went twice, I was like, they don't have no power. Like, exercise your power. Why aren't you exercising your power? And that's one of the things I got from it. Lots of validation. I'm also an artist and an entrepreneur. So I was like inspired to continue creating Black spaces the way I want to, because I also felt empowered when you told the white people to leave. And yeah, so grateful for the space. Grateful to see you fuck it up. And yeah.
Hurting. He's hurting.
So I have endometriosis, and I've been on the receiving end of like medical racism and having white doctors be like, it's probably just this. It's probably just this. And even just in like the last 2 weeks, I had a very like painful and traumatic experience at the gynecologist. So when I found out that we were beating the quote unquote father of gynecology's ass, I was like, I'm gonna save up my spoons for this. Like, I was like, okay, I'm resting today, I'm resting the next day, I'm not doing anything that's gonna limit my energy because I'm saving it for here. Because being chronically ill, there's only so much you get to do in a weekend. Like, one day can fuck you up for the next 2 days. But I was just like, no, I'm coming to this because I wanted to be here. I don't think I hit him for very long, but when I was doing it, like in my head, I just kept hearing, this is for us, this is for us, this is for us, like every time I did it. And I'm just really glad I got to be here and I experienced this. So thank you.
Thank you.
That paddle, though.
Yeah, your paddle is great.
Ooh. Yeah.
Hold on for 1 second. I need to put on a timer because I got ADHD, y'all, and like, we run out of time. But I just wanted to say too, I used to work in museum collections, so like, I get it when you were talking about putting it together. So props off to you because oof, it's rough. But yeah, I mean, I really like it felt cathartic, which is a word I've been hearing a lot of today. But also a thought that came up in my head is, my mother had originally, I'm gonna give you my anime tragic backstory for like 2 seconds, but basically when I was born, I also was born alongside of a tumor that my mother had, like with me, and it gave me a club foot. The doctors were originally gonna cut it off, but then my mother was able to find somebody, and they were able to save my foot. So while I was punching, I didn't even realize that was a thought that I had, and my friend and I were talking about this. Oh, here you are. But we were talking about this, about how, a lot of times when you see art, the violence and things that like artists want to show don't necessarily come out. But in this particular exhibition, I really felt like the audience engagement really like gave the violence a real palpable sense. And spiritually rise, it, you know, it's very, it really gave me this thought that like a haunting of like a ghost doesn't necessarily have to be like banging in the night. It can be the actions of people who are gone and whose actions continue in others. So yeah.
I just want to say that I appreciate the both of you and everyone who contributed in this activation. It was just amazing, wonderful seeing everyone put their heart and soul into it. And I just wanted to say it was like liberating and healing to assault this white person or the symbol of this white person and whiteness in general without the burden of being punished for it. And that was just so important. And like, it did something, and it was great. So thank you, and I appreciate that.
Have other reflections they want to share before we go into question mode?
Hello, thank you. One thing that I was thinking about, I'm an educator here, and I have been here for some years, and I feel like this is the first time I've ever felt in the space. And this is the first time I have seen a collection of Black people be in this space and activated, and like the electricity of those Black people, right, being in this ritual is still like here, right? Like I have not yet felt, right? And I feel like my being in the museum feels uneasy because I can't be the regular person that I am here, right? And so one thing that I was thinking the most about while I was in space and watching everyone and trying to grab people like, no, come do this right now, because like we need to be a part of this right now is, right, I've toured this show, I've talked about this show with so many people in the last few months, and there is such a stark difference between sitting in that room, right, or being on the picture and talking about it and these like feelings of disgust that come up for people, and this very different kind of like institutional disgust that comes up when the piece is like activated and comes alive. And that it's very different, right? And that what you all were saying in this conversation about Black art and about representation, all those things, right? That like it's totally fine to see Black people bleeding in paintings and video and all that, but at the very second that like whiteness is in danger, that like the whole institution is like, we can't do this. This is not. This is so exclusive. This is, you know. And I have for myself been struggling. Do I still want to be up in this space? Do I still need to give my energy here? I don't. But this is making me think, right? That something else can happen up in here, right? And that like if I can be a part of it with what I know how to do, that I can. So I really appreciate you.
I just want to say I wanted you to be here so much today after just seeing the care you've given to the show and the way you have educated about the show so thoughtfully and with such care and your whole heart. So it meant a lot that you could be part of it today too, and we should talk. I want you in this space. So, but I feel you. I really do, and I appreciate you naming all that you did.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for today. Over the years I've known you, it just has been like your timing in my life has like been incredible, but continues to be incredible. And I think today, what's funny, so I came in from Philly today, which is where I live, but I am kind of on call here when I either sit with you at sessions, see your work in your shows, or today engaging with it. It just, what's really remarkable about you is the times when I'm not seeing you in person, we have this like online back and forth. It's like this very queer and very Black and very femme dynamic. And then to today be this very queer and very Black and very femme dynamic in this space, it was like right on time in a lot of ways for me. And I just, yeah, I appreciate that and appreciate you. Yeah.
Thanks, Maya.
Hi. I just want to say I learned about you in art school like 4 years ago, and I've been like infatuated. And I was all the way in California, and then I just moved here, and like I came when the show opened, and I came with 2 white friends, and it felt very weird to like be in the space with them and like not really. I feel like I couldn't really like dive into it. And then like coming back, I told myself like I'm gonna come back either by myself or not with my white friends. And then I came back today and it was just like a whole different experience. Like I felt like I was really able to like release. And I unfortunately didn't get to do the activation part, but I just like experiencing it again, like with my Black partner, it's just like a whole different experience. And I think like people talking about how you like asked the white people to leave and like how there are so many instances where we're not able to like just exist and be ourselves without being surveilled, is just like really necessary. And I didn't really think about that until I like reflected on just how different it felt to come in 2 different times. So thank you.
I don't want to move us through too quickly through this process. I also want to give people time to see the show one last time if they want to, but if other folks want to share who are part of the activation, want to last call for some reflections. And I also know that like it takes some processing of the experience as well, and I'm sure more will come up in the coming days. But any thoughts? Yeah.
I will also say thank you for doing this work. I guess for me, as I was doing it and as I was watching other people assault this figure, I kept thinking about what it means to desecrate a dead body and how so many Black people have lived in fear for so long about the desecration of their bodies after their deaths. And so I felt like it's one thing to engage the figure as a living figure, it's another thing to engage that figure as a decapitated, dead figure that can continue to be assaulted from now until the end of time. And so it just, I guess for me, I'm still thinking about what that means and how that changes my relationship to the sculpture, but I wanted to share that as an offering to think about, what does it mean to not only put the effort that you do into creating the figures, but what those figures allow other people to experience for generations. So yeah, thank you.
We're talking about if we should open it up for Q&A.
Like I don't know, sure.
Yeah, I think we can. I would prefer to hear from the richly melanated. Yes. So if there are any pressing questions. Other people can ask too. I'm just saying, like,
It's me again.
just wait your turn.
Yeah, feel free. So, okay, so we know that like routinely, black bodies, alive and dead, but out specifically like tombstones are routinely like assaulted and desecrated by white people over and over and over and over again. One example is Emmett Till's tombstone. That's just one. They've had to replace it so many times, but this happens a lot to other people, but Emmett Till's on my mind. So I guess my question is, so we can push this work forward so it doesn't just stay here and stay in this experience, so we push these ideas moving forward. How do we continue to assault whiteness? How do we continue to inflict pain on white bodies, like dead and alive? Because as we can see, exercising our power, it's like we are being healed, we are being transformed, which is what we need, you know? So in your opinion, how do we continue to move this work forward so we find our liberation?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like this show is like the prompt, right? It's like now that you've gathered this information, you can go out into the world and like enact the things that you want to. I think it's really important to continue research, so you can be informed about like the things that you're attempting to either educate people on or ways to kind of like transform that information into something that people can digest, whether it's like visual or like audio or anything, right? Like just constantly like thinking about the ways that you've received the information and ways that I think a lot about like Harriet Washington, right? She wrote the book Medical Apartheid, which is about the exploitation of black bodies through the medical industry. And she had to go through so many medical journals, chicken scratches, lots and lots of like heavy terms in order to kind of like bury all the critical information underneath language. And so the books that she's written have been a lot easier for me to process rather than me going through each of these individual journals, right? And so I've taken what I've learned from the things that she's written and transformed it into this, object or performance or whatever. And so I think it's important for all of us to continue doing research, but also to like consider the ways that people process information. Some people are bad at tests, right? And they're more like better, like, I don't know. I'm not good at tests either. I'm just gonna say that. But it just depends on like how you're thinking about how people are processing information and how you can kind of like translate that into something that can continue the momentum, snowball into just like, I don't know, a radical lifestyle or like inspire people to be a little bit more radical.
I'll just say like this phrase is gonna stay with me for a while. This idea of like this was a space where we could enact revenge without punishment, without being punished for it. And I think that's a huge piece of it. I feel like as I've navigated the world and have tried to have my mini revolts, micro macro revolts, right? Like there are consequences. I've been punished many times for speaking out, and I know many of us have as well. And so that's part of that story still, and something that I'm moving through, and I think others might be too.
So one thing that I notice about the work is I am a pretty big, I really like Francis Bacon. It's an artist I've always followed. But something that I've noticed with a lot of white artists throughout history is that they're allowed this sort of violence, or to at least express their violence and despair in a way that I feel like a lot of people of color are not. So how do you balance the you know, the reality, the violence aspect of your work with this sort of like softness and beauty that comes with it as well.
Yeah, I've also been really into his work and other artists that fall into the sadomasochistic category. For me, I think that I am allowing myself to go a little bit deeper because I'm working with white flesh, and it seems like that is the language that you have to use if you're expressing violence. Like, at some point, you know, people could not even know that I'm like a black femme, right? Because it is aesthetically so in line with all these other artists and the work that they produce. So I do think that that offers a little bit of freedom for me. But it is also kind of strange thinking about like the celebration of like the masochism in art making, or like the perversion, and who is allowed to be perverse or be perverted, and like not only in your real life but also in the work that you produce. So wait, what was the end of the question?
Yeah, I know, it's like one layer on top of the other. It's crazy. Basically was like, how do you balance just the violence and the beauty together?
Right, balancing the beauty. Yeah, well, in exploring all this, like, you know, especially with the diseases, it's just all disgusting. So I know that a lot of people are already repelled just aesthetically by whatever the thing or whatever the diseases represent, right? The symptoms, like things oozing, things scabbing over, things like bubbling up and popping. So I am always trying to find materials that people are used to being attracted to. So it's like crystals, pearls, gems, cabochons, glitter, things that people are used to valuing, right? And so then when they see it within this context, they are instantly confused because they're like, well, I'm into this, but I'm not into that. But I'm kind of into it because they're close together, you know? So I think when you start to like fuck around with people's psychology and like how they process like materials and subjects, it allows you to have a more expanded conversation, and also like get people to process and absorb information, like especially like considering like this type of subject matter, right? Like a lot of people probably just came into the show thinking like, oh yeah, what's this red thing back here? Not really expecting it to be so heavy, but also to be so beautiful at the same time. Like when I'm making these sculptures, I'm walking around and I'm making sure it's sparkling at every angle, just to like really build up the enticement and the titillation of everything. That's like the strongest force in my work is like making people feel really uncomfortable because not only are they really into it, but they're also really repelled by it too.
Your work, what I've seen is that it's oftentimes written about from like as work that engages historical events. And I personally have been frustrated by the lack of, or the preference of that narrative over engaging with the kind of art making that you do, like the technique and what have you. So I just wanted to ask how you feel about that. Like, what do you think about the way your work is taken up, and its relationship to history versus its relationship to just being an artwork?
Right. Yeah, I think oftentimes the work is being used as an educational tool. But yeah, my experience as an artist is pretty wide. Like, I'm also like a pretty good draftsperson, a pretty good painter. I'm also a glass blower. Yeah, in addition to making like really disgusting sculptures, that could also like double as like special effects, you know, prosthetics and makeup and things like that. So I do think that yeah, people be sleeping on how much like work and effort I put into being a master at all these things, so that, you know, the work it doesn't have any loopholes. Like, craftsmanship is so important to me. And I am really interested in like all those things kind of like coming together. But yeah, I do wish that people would lean more into that, because I put a lot of energy into that. And honestly, like, if I had a lot more time, these things would be blistering with crystals, right? But that's also another thing too, like, when we're talking about the art making process and like having breakthroughs and things, I really thrive. I don't want to say thrive, but me under pressure is like a really different story. And, you know, going along with like a lot of like shamanist theories and things, spiritual breakthroughs do happen through near-death experiences. So, you know, having these deadlines and doing these exhibitions, it pushes me to do things that I didn't think that I was capable of doing. So in addition to having a lot of like education and experience and like all these different processes, I'm also like, you know, breaking myself at the same time. And so some of the things that I wouldn't necessarily think of doing, like, you know, based on my education and experience, comes through like just being there in the moment. And I think that that's a part of the art process that not a lot of people talk about too, like the breakthroughs that happen when you're at your ends and like don't really think that you can make it past, not even make a deadline, but I don't even know like if I can survive the emotional like turmoil after the exhibition opens. And then after it closes, you know, it's like a lot of it is so emotionally draining. And that is also a huge part of my practice too. Like, in addition to the process and stuff, it's like what happens emotionally and spiritually in my studio is like really specific.
Y'all, I think just thinking about time that we have left and wanting to make space for you to close us out, that we should maybe stop there, and there's many more conversations to be had. You're not going anywhere.
I hope not. Or maybe, I don't know.
No, I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna affirm that. So yeah, more to come. Thank you so much for today and for this experience together. And
Vivian, thank you. Honestly,
lots of plotting for the future.
I think it's very important that we talk about how we hold this trauma in our bodies and what we could do about it. Working with Cobra over the last year, doing energy work, doing spiritual aligning, getting them back to their divine selves, to release all the things, to be more whole. So this is the exercise where we're going to take a deep breath in, and we're going to breathe our way back to ourselves, and we're going to let go, and we're going to release. So if you can, just go inside with me. And we're going to take a deep breath in, and we're going to hold it on the count of 4. And as we hold it, I would like for you to imagine that you're releasing this generational trauma that we've been holding on to. We're releasing all the microaggressions that we go through each and every day. Let's collectively take this deep breath in right now. And let's hold it. And now whatever it is that you want to release, let's let it go. You know, the color of red is associated with our root chakra, and this is taking our authority back. This is your divine right. We're going to take another deep breath in right now, and we're going to take this authority back. Let's breathe it in. Hold it. And now let's release it. Beautiful. Sometimes we forget to breathe. But what is breath? Breath is life. And without this breath, we wouldn't be in this body. Breath calms us down. Breath moves us through the hard times. Breath causes us to make the right choices in life. We're going to breathe our way home, back to ourselves. And something else throughout time that has been very cathartic for people is drumming. And moving through things, the drums helps us feel our heartbeat, helps us grow, helps us transmute and transform energy. So this next song coming up before we get out of here, I would like for you to really listen to the words. I would like for you to really feel the drums. I would like for those in the back to come around. We can get up. We can all come around.
The drums call me. The drums call me. Call me, call me, call me, call me, call me, call me. The drums call me. With each beat of our planet's heart, I move closer to you. And the questions that remain unanswered melt. And the tears that flowed like an African river now navigate towards the truth. The drums call me. Call me by a name that comes from the depth of the sea, an infinite sea. It is the voice of my ancestors. It is the voice of my ancestors. And they say, come. They also call you.
It transmutes the energy. It transforms the energy. You feel it throughout your body.
drums call me. The drums call me.
You were called to come here today
The drums
to pay
call me.
homage to this amazing artist. And we would like to thank you. And we would like to thank Cobra for doing this amazing work.
The season of indecision is past. And with the return of the sage moon, I invite you to the light.
Thank you.